We're finishing our series on Joshua, and I cannot believe the slander you let slide last week. I could not believe it. I did a whole sermon on the Battle of Jericho. I said the walls fell and everything. I did it. I promise. I promise. And now we're doing 1, 2, skip a few to chapter 22, 23, 24. So we're just jumping to the end because we can't stay here forever. But, man, it was a great night. The kids were all excited. They always are on these kind of nights. I had had my meal. The cake was out. And now they're just jumping around because it's time for me to open this giant box that's on the floor that somehow everybody moved in there because I'm the only one in the family who could lift it. And it's my final birthday present of the night. And at some point along the way, my wife decided, my husband's the worst at telling me what he wants for his birthday, so I'm just going to get him tools. We'll build his tool set that way. And I open the box and I pull out this nice, awesome miter saw. It's a very good saw. I love it. It's amazing. And the kids are so excited. They can't believe they bought me this present, mainly because they didn't buy me that present. I bought me that present, but I like it. I'm glad we allocated those funds to that. And they're all dancing around the whole thing. And then it just kind of dies down, and you can see them looking at me and looking at the saw and looking at me and looking at the saw, and you can kind of see their wheels turning, and they start to think, so when do we get to try it out? Like, when do we go play with this thing? And so, like, right in the middle of my birthday party, I have to stop and say, hey, kids, I want you to look at me. Everybody look at Dad. By the time you leave my household, you will all know how to use this tool. By the time you go into the world to be your own person, that sort of thing, I will have taught you how to use this tool. But seeing as all of you are 8 years old and younger in this room, until I teach you how to use it, you may not touch this. And being a parent is kind of like that, isn't it? There's things you have to just kind of figure out. When do we start incorporating the new things, the dangerous things into our child's life? When do we start saying, okay, you are now old enough and coordinated enough to say, this is something you can do? And it might seem like I'm using the wrong word to say, when do we start incorporating danger into our kids' lives? But I'm not. What would you call a hot frying pan? What would you call a saw? What would you call a car or a minivan? These are things that are so common in our day-to-day lives that we kind of forget that they are dangerous. And as parents, we each have to kind of figure out the question, when is it that we are saying, hey, you're still too young enough to learn how to cook an egg on the stove, and when is it to the point where you should already know how to do this? When is it where you're right, and you have to kind of feel these things out? Because by the end of their time in our homes, they're going to have to know how to do these things. They're going to have to be able to, I remember watching The Daily Show where they're making fun of New Jersey because it's the last state in the Union, right? It's the last state in America that you can't just fill your own gas tank up. and they're like, well, what about the dangers? And there's a video of the guy like lighting his whole self on fire, you know what I mean? And just dying because of gas, filling the gas tank. But if you have kids, you go, well, that could happen actually. I think they could make it happen. And so the question is, when do we start adding new responsibilities to their lives so they can be fully functioning, cooperative adults when they leave our homes? Darren, can you bump the lights up just a tiny bit? And this is so important. I even believe this to the level of worldview and belief, where there are different things this world will teach people, this world will give people that maybe your kids are not ready to kind of handle that. And so, but it's also in the world, so they have to one day be able to know what's out there. They have to be able to cipher through it, see, okay, what do you think about this, kids? And I have decided, I've not actually talked to my wife about this, but she's in the room, so she's now in the know. I have decided that a day is coming in each of my kids' lives where I'll sit down with them and I'll say, you know what? It is a great big world out there. And there are many things you can spend your whole life chasing. There are many things that you can go after trying to find satisfaction and joy and fun and pleasure. There's all sorts of things. And from this point forward, it'll be your job to kind of figure that out. But until that day comes, I'm going to give my worldview a thoroughgoing chance to implant itself in my kids' hearts and my kids' minds. Because you know what? I'm their dad. It's kind of my job. And I can't protect them from the world forever, and I can't even pretend to try to do it right now because things happen all the time. But for the times I can kind of manage the situation, I'm going to try to figure out when is the right time for them to start learning how to cook eggs? When is the right time for them to start doing this? When is the right time for them to start doing that? And we're going to teach our kids so they can go out of our homes into the world prepared. And this is where Joshua finds himself today. Joshua finds himself in a place where he's been the spiritual father of these people for a long time. He has been, he has been the person they've all been looking to for spiritual guidance for a long time. And before that, a long time before that, he was the assistant to Moses, who was the guy who they'd all been looking to for spiritual guidance for a long time. And Joshua teaches us something about spiritual fathers and people, spiritual mentors and spiritual mothers who come into our lives and help us. And this is something that you need to know about these spiritual leaders that we find for our lives, is that they don't live forever. They can't be there forever. They can't always be the person who's there to say, this is the right next move and this is the next thing you got to do. And Joshua is now preparing his people for that moment when he won't be there. If you have your Bibles, open up to Joshua chapter 23. Joshua chapter 23. And if you're wondering what happened in between chapters 6 and 23, don't worry about it. It's not. We'll cover it in another series on Joshua that takes 2 months. I'm just joking. We're never coming back to this book. I'm just joking. 23 verse 1, if you don't have your Bibles, it's going to be up here. After a long time had passed, and the Lord had given Israel rest from all of their enemies around them, Joshua, by then a very old man, summoned all of Israel, their elders, leaders, judges, officials, and he said to them, I am very old. You yourselves have seen everything the Lord has done to all these nations for your sake. It was the Lord your God who fought for you. Now, I want you to just remind ourselves for a moment what God has done for these people. Because it's not just what's been taking place in the book of Joshua. They were slaves in Egypt. They had no religion. They had no culture. They had no national identity. They had no nothing. They were slaves in Egypt. They were brick makers. That's what they did. Day in, day out, day in, day out. And then God says, Moses, I've heard the cries of my people. I want you to get them out of there. And he goes and he has the 10 plagues and he runs them out of Egypt and he parts the Red Sea and he sends them through there. And then Moses is sitting on the other side of the Red Sea in the wilderness with a group of people who were kind of an ornery bunch. They're feisty. They're fighters. They're bickering all the time. They're complaining all the time. They're kind of unpleasant people. And every little thing would cause this giant rebellion, this giant insurrection against Moses. How could we have ended up out here? We don't have any food. And every little thing would cause them fighting over and over and over again. To the point where Moses spent a lot of his life going, God, can you just take me? Like, can I be done now? I'm done with these people. And God's like, nope, because if you're gone, I'm going to destroy them. He's like, okay, well, between the two of us, maybe we won't destroy everybody. And then, little by little, God gives them the law, starting with the 10 Commandments. And he builds from there, and he builds from there. And little by little, over 40 years, he starts chipping away at these just unpleasantries, the just nastiness of this group of people. And he starts saying, this is how you will live. This is how I want you to be. And over the years, they start shaping these people through the law, through the teachings of Moses, through the guidance of Moses. And by the end of the book of Numbers, which is the end of the story part of the law, the end of the 40 years, there's this story that takes place where something goes wrong. They don't know, they come to a situation they don't know what to do. And where normally you're expecting these people to just start to go on this just rebellion and just like, all right, we're now rebelling, let's go back to Egypt, the whole thing. And instead they do this. It's the most bizarre thing ever. They go, hey, Moses, we don't really know what to do here. Can you tell us the best course of action? And you go, wow, 40 years with God really helps. That's amazing. Okay. And then he takes them into the promised land. And he drives out the people before them. And now they're sitting here in the promised land that they've been promised 400 years before. And they have rest on all sides. And he's going to say this later on, but I'll just tell you now. He says, listen, and you're now living in a land that you didn't toil. You're living in cities you didn't build. You're eating from vineyards and olive trees that you didn't plant. He says, I didn't give you that. God did. God did. It was God who fought for you. It was God who led you. It's God who shaped you. It's God who's changed you. And then he says this, be very strong. Be careful to obey all that is written in the book of the law of Moses without turning to the right or to the left. I love this section of the Bible. I love it. Do you know why? You remember week 1, 2 months ago? Do you remember? What was everyone and their brothers saying to Joshua? Be strong and courageous. God's like, hey, Joshua, you're going to be the leader. I need you to lead my people. But here's the deal. I need you to be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous. He goes, fine, I'll be strong and courageous. I promise. And then he goes and presents himself to the Israelites. And they all go, we'll follow you just like we followed Moses if you're strong and courageous. If you're not strong and courageous, then, whatever. And they're all saying, listen, you will be the requirements we have for you, Joshua, is that you'll be brave and that you'll be spiritually healthy. You remember that? You remember that? Everyone, both sides, God said, people said, everyone wanted to know, is Joshua going to be brave? Is Joshua going to stay spiritually healthy through this time? And do you remember what Joshua said to them? How he responded when the people had the gall to require God's leader to be brave and spiritually healthy? You remember what he said? Nothing. Sounds like a deal to me. Let's get going. Of course, it makes sense that people want you to be spiritually healthy and brave if you're going to lead them. Of course they want that. And then the book of Joshua got written. The book of his life got written down, literally. And you could see that throughout the pages, almost entirely, he had been strong, courageous, and spiritually healthy, working as hard as he could to not turn from the left or to the right, but to follow God the way God wanted him to be followed. And now a long time has passed. And this guy's old. And he's going, guys, I want to go back to that question you had a long time ago. As we were all starting to get into this land, you all had a question. Will our leader be strong and courageous? Will our leader be careful to follow the law Moses has given us? And I think that was a fair question. But you missed the far more important question. Will you be strong and courageous? Will you be careful to follow the law that God has given us and not turn to the left or turn to the right? And here's the deal. You and I can search the world for pastors, for preachers, for mentors, for people to disciple us who will be noble enough and righteous enough and take care to follow God's word enough to be worthwhile for you to listen to or you to follow their advice or you to follow their example. But here's the deal. At the end of the day, the most important question you and I have to ask ourselves is, what will we do in relation to God? How will we live our lives when God calls us to follow him? What will we do with his word? What will we do with our time on earth? How will we be brave? And how will we make sure that we stay spiritually healthy? Because guess what? The book has been written on Joshua. He was brave and he was spiritually healthy. But these people have the rest of their lives to live. And Joshua can't be there forever. And you know what? It's actually not that good a thing for Joshua to have to be there forever to tell them every little thing they have to do. It would be better if we as God's people can decide for ourselves. I will go where God leads me. I will do what he says do. And I'll be careful to follow his will and not turn to the left or to the right. Will we be strong and careful to obey God? He says in verse 14, now I'm about to go the way of all the earth. You know with all your heart and soul that not one of all the good promises the Lord your God has given you has failed. Every promise has been fulfilled. Just as all the good things that the Lord your God has promised you have come true, so he will bring you all the evil things that he has threatened, until the Lord your God has destroyed you from the land that he has given you, if you violate the covenant of the Lord your God. Now listen. Joshua's now going, listen, I've told you this almost every single week of this series. One of the key verses of this entire book, one of the key themes of this entire book is that God, when he makes promises, he keeps them. That every promise he's made does not fail, but is fulfilled. And then he says, God actually keeps those promises in both directions. He keeps those promises in both directions. He says, if you live this way, I'll bless you. And if you live this way, I'll curse you. And in fact, Moses actually said this. When Moses was writing the law, he was actually saying, he'd say, listen, I am setting before you life and death. I'm setting before you curses and blessing. Choose life. Choose life. God has given you the way to live. He's the one who created this world. He's created humans. He knows how we are supposed to live. And he's saying, listen, the choice is set before us. Choose life. And this is a quote from God in chapter 24, verse 13. It says this. So, and this is the end of something God says. It says this. So I gave you a land on which you did not toil, and cities you did not build, and you live on them, and you eat from vineyards and olive groves that you did not plant. That's God talking. Joshua saying, listen, God has given us every reason to choose him. And now this is Joshua giving his advice, his suggestion. Now fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. You've seen what he's done for you. You've seen how he keeps promises. You've seen how his way of life is better than the world's way of life. Now fear him and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods of your ancestors that your ancestors worshipped beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve. Because it is a great big world out there. And there's a lot of things you can spend your life chasing. There's a lot of things that you can do day after day to find pleasure and joy and success. And you can spend your entire life chasing them. If serving God seems undesirable for you, then choose who you will serve. What will be what will be the direction you take your life to find all the things your heart needs? But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. And there's Joshua's courage and spiritual health once again. It takes courage to follow God. It takes courage to be the only one in the room saying, I listen, I know everyone else is doing it, but this is what I'm going to have to do. It takes courage to be the person in the room where everyone's going, you're not one of those crazy people that believes in God, are you? And Joshua's going, listen, We've gotten you as far as we can get you. And this is one of the key points. This is one of the key points of the entire Bible, of our relationship with God, is that everyone has to make the decision on their own. Everyone has to make it for themselves. I am raising my kids as Christians. I am raising them to show up at church every single Sunday. We go to church on vacation, by the way. Love it. I'm not going to look at my kids and be like, oh, it's okay if you told a lie to your sister. That's okay because you haven't really repented and given your life to Christ yet. No, I'm raising them to follow the rules of the Bible. That's what I'm doing. My kids love God because we've taught them to love God. They love Jesus because we've taught them to love Jesus. And they like the Bible stories because we've taught them the Bible stories. We are raising them a certain way, but every single one of us has to admit that at some point along the way, they have to make the choice on their own. Because there's a great big world out there. And if you have, for the two families who are going to do child dedication, this would be a good time to go get your kids. It is a great big world out there. And there are a lot of things that we can spend our lives chasing. There's a lot of things that promise us fulfillment. There's a lot of things out there that we have to, that our kids and each one of us have to decide. Will I keep these or will I keep God? And Joshua's command is get rid of the idols of your heart. Get rid of the things that you think will show that you're something. Get rid of the things of this world that make you think you're successful. Get rid of the things. Say, I'm not going to build my worth on the amount of money in my bank account. I'm not going to build my value on the amount of friends I have. I'm not going to build my success on how much people look at me and just drool over what I can do. I'm going to be who God says I am, and that will be what means something to me. Are we going to throw away the idols of our heart, or are we not? And as long as God has blessed us with families, with kids that are in our homes and are looking up to us, we need to be like Joshua and say, as for me and my household, we're going to serve God. And as long as you're in my household, you're going to serve as well. We're going to operate like we're a Christian family. And in one day, they will move out of my house. Like your kids are going to move out of your house, like when they're 35 or something. What's the going age now where people are getting out of houses? 40. Yeah, but they quit using your tools at 60, though. So that's a... and here's the deal. Here's the deal. We need to do whatever we can to give the gospel of Jesus Christ a thoroughgoing chance to be implanted in the hearts and the minds of our kids. Because one day, they'll have to choose for themselves. No one can go before you to the Father. There's actually some stories where people actually took their mom, two disciples took their mom to talk to Jesus. They're like, hey, Jesus, my mom wants to ask you a question. And she's like, can you give my kids a special job? And Jesus goes, you really don't know what you're asking for. But the answer is no, I'm not going to do it just because your mom asked me to. No one can go before you to God. Each one of us has to stand before our Creator on our own. And the good news of the gospel is this: that the Son, Jesus Christ, does go before us. He speaks on our behalf to the Father. When no one else can go there, He is there saying, I will be a mediator between you and God, and your kids and God, and your friends in God, and your neighbors in God, and I will go before them. But everyone has to accept that for themselves. So the question we have today is this: can we decide? Can you decide once and for all? Like, make the decision. What am I going to do with the idols of my heart? What am I going to do with this man, Jesus Christ, who will not leave me alone? Who has gone from heaven to earth to the grave and to the sky again so that I could be reunited with God. What are we going to do with God? What are we going to do with Jesus? Can we decide? Or we're going to forever sit here and just go, well, I don't want to take any of my options away, so I'm going to hold on to all of them. And here's what Jesus says. He says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father but through me. And for those of us who want to think, I'll just not decide, I'll just not choose, that is to choose when you're dealing with Jesus. He's a hardline guy. I don't know what to tell you about that, but he just is. He doesn't give people the option to just not choose. And Joshua says you should choose for yourself this day who you will serve. Who you'll serve. And here's the deal. I want this to be a church where families can grow stronger. Marriages grow healthier. Parents and kids grow in relational strength and kindness and joy and love to where it's just the gospel of Jesus just kind of going throughout. And I know that high school years are high school years. I get that. I get it. And we want to be a church where people have the ability to come and say, teach me how to teach my kids. Teach me how to be a godly parent. Teach me how to be a godly person or a godly mother, a godly husband. How do we do this? But here's the deal. If you're sitting here in the pew going, man, I've wasted the first 14 years of my kid's life. I've never spent a moment of my time as a parent trying to pour into them spiritually. This is not something you can just flip a switch one day and pretend like you've always acted this way. You'll probably have to go, look, family, God's doing something in my heart. And I want this to be a household that's affected by the love of Jesus. And I want this to be a household that is honorable and faithful to God. And things are going to be a little different. I'm going to be different. I'm going to try to be a better dad. I'm going to try to be a better mom. But there's also going to be some new things. You might be the only person in your school who's not allowed to do X, Y, or Z. And as long as you're in my house, it's going to be kind of how it works. And if you want to ever talk about this scenario, about what's going on in my heart, about what I think about God, I'm an open book. Come talk to me. Now, I know your kids would probably go, okay, cool, Dad, or, oh, you're so annoying, or whatever they do. But at least you're there trying to keep the lines of communication open. And you're owning the fact that I haven't done this very well up till now. Let's talk if you ever want to talk. And then at some point, around 11:30, when they should have been in bed already, they'll go, hey, Dad, I have a question. You go, all right. Open lines of communication. And maybe, a day will come down when they're a parent or they're 30 or 40, and they'll go, you know what? My mom or my dad planted something in me that made it easier or better or more likely for me to say, yes, I want Jesus Christ. Because they lived as parents and they gave God a thoroughgoing chance to implant himself in my heart. And maybe God will do that in my family. And maybe he'll do it in your family. And as a church, we want to be able to help each other do that. And so the question is this: how will we decide? What will be your choice? Because everyone has to choose for themselves.